Hi everybody, it's Liam. We recorded this episode a few days before George Floyd was murdered by police in Minneapolis, Minnesota, before Tony McDade was murdered by police in Tallahassee, Florida, and after Breonna Taylor and many more Black Americans were murdered by police in America. We wanted to use this intro to state that Black Lives Matter and that we stand in solidarity with those putting themselves on the line to fight against a racist, white supremacist government and law enforcement. And if you look in the show notes, you can find ways to help and support those doing good work. We hope you enjoy this week's episode. I'm Liam Billingham.
I'm Gerasimos Fragopoulos.
God damn it. And this is
Oeuvre Busters. I don't think that was the theme song. Actually, the theme song to this is that Sigrid song.
Does it irritate you to no end when they drop in the Superman theme to this movie and the Batman theme occasionally? Because it irritates me to no end. It's like lobster stuffed with tacos.
That sounds actually enticing. No, actually, it kind of it's funny. Irritate? No, it made me nostalgic for better films, though.
That's the problem. Like I'm stuck watching this movie. I don't want to be thinking about better movies. Speaking of movies, George, what movie are we talking about?
Liam, today we're discussing the very controversial. This is actually probably the most controversial film we've ever done.
And a great week to discuss it because of the recent news, which we'll talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah. 2017's Justice League, directed by Zack Snyder / Joss Whedon, which I guess obviously we should talk about.
Yeah,
should we just talk about the news now and get it over with?
I kind of want to save it and the reason that I want to save it, I guess that we can talk about the news and then we can talk about our feelings about the news. What's the news?
So the news is obviously for everybody who's been under a rock, of course, or for people who thankfully don't have this kind of stuff on their cultural radar.
Yeah, like people with real lives.
Oh my God, yeah, exactly.
If you're not an angry white man, you may not have heard.
You may not have heard the greatest news since your
Snyder cut.
Since your man won the 2016 election. Is that the Snyder cut confirmed. Snyder, not Schneider. Schneider makes him sound cooler, even though. Yeah. Yes, go ahead. Will be coming out in 2021 on HBO
Max.
What's it called? HBO Max. Yeah,
yes.
And apparently, obviously, his initial cut of this film was something like 4 hours long, and he cut it down to 2.5 hours. And I do have to say one thing when I first started watching this film yesterday, and I saw it about like 1.5 times actually. I watched it. I had it running in the background earlier today.
Well, you have to have something to masturbate to.
Yeah. While I was sweeping and masturbating and watching, is that I was shocked that this film is under 2 hours because I thought it was as bloated as Batman v Superman.
So I think it's I think the interesting thing about the Zack Snyder cut is that I think this announcement confirms that it never actually existed, which I think is very interesting. Let's talk about the movie that we saw, and then I want to come back to it because I actually have a lot of mixed feelings about this whole thing. But yes, you're right. This film was directed by Zack Snyder and then edited. The editing was supervised by Joss Whedon, who then worked on the script and then reshot key sequences from the movie in June of 2017, with the movie coming out in November 17. And there are claims that as much as 80% of the movie was reshot. But Charles Roven, the producer, says like 80% of the movie you see is the movie that Zack Snyder wanted to make. So let's talk about it. There's a Hollywood Reporter article that I don't know if you got a chance to look at, but has some interesting tidbits about the production. Do you want to tell us what happens in this movie?
Sure, I'll try. So this film picks up from 2016's Batman v Superman with obviously the death of Superman, spoiler. So the film begins with Batman, as again played by Ben Affleck.
And I think a less good performance, a far less good performance than he gives in Batman v Superman.
So much stiffer.
Yeah.
Like the existential exhaustion that Bruce Wayne has in the previous film is kind of like this aura to the character. And this film becomes like internalized. And I feel like when I see Affleck on the screen, I could tell he's just like, what am I doing here?
Right.
Like, this is
Well,
like,
there's
I'm
a lot
just
of
cashing a paycheck.
extra textual stuff that we could talk about, including his like issues with mental health and substance abuse that were like reaching a peak with this movie, which is, there's a lot of sadness around the production of these movies.
Totally.
So Superman dies, Batman fights a parademon.
Yeah, so it's kind of like this extraterrestrial being that is a kind of harbinger of sorts that has come to Earth in the wake of Superman's death.
Real quick, the actor that he confronts in that scene, the actor who the
burglar
is
in the beginning,
Holt McCallany, who plays Bill Tench on Mindhunter, who's in a lot of David Fincher movies and is just the fucking best, and is fluent in French because he studied clowning at École Jacques Lecoq, the premier clowning institute in France, which I considered going to at a different time in my life.
I believe they just call him miming.
Miming. Get the fuck out of here with your...
The higher elevated?
No, I think clowning. It's French clowning, so it's more sophisticated.
Now I'm getting like flashbacks of those episodes, those early episodes of Zach Galifianakis's Baskets. Have you ever seen Baskets?
No, I haven't watched it. I should watch it. I like that this whole episode is just going to be digressions where we don't get through the plot summary of the movie.
The character goes to this like very prestigious, I mean, obviously it's probably based on the same thing, but it goes to this very prestigious clown school in France, no less.
Yeah,
anyway.
Totally. École Jacques Lecoq.
Yeah. So Batman fights, and it's what's really also fascinating about the scene, just quickly, is that actually Batman does not. Initially, it seems like Batman is again doing that thing that he loves to do, and that is protecting private property and taking down this petty burglar, but he actually lets him go, which is surprising.
He does let him go. Well, he has to fight a parademon. Why does anyway, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Nothing matters anymore.
Why does the parademon die?
No, why does he show up? Why is he there? Why is he chasing a burglar?
Oh, for fear. I'm not saying it makes sense.
For fear?
But for fear, yeah.
What?
Yeah, because the parademons are attracted to fear.
Oh, so he's
That's why he hangs off the building. Remember, he says like,
"Fuck that."
He says like,
"Fuck that."
I need you. Oh yeah,
this
no,
is
this
is stupid. All right, let's get through the plot summary and then end the episode early.
We've been recording for 50 minutes already.
It's 45. It's longer than the movie.
So Batman uses this guy's fear to get this parademon to come to him so he could, I don't know, fight it or whatever. Anyway, it's at this moment that Batman's like, oh shit, I should probably go after those metahumans that I found out about from the previous film. And the next kind of like half hour, 45 minutes is about him like getting the band together. So he goes after Aquaman. He tries to recruit the Flash. Wonder Woman finds him, and she is told to kind of recruit Cyborg, Victor Stone. It's at this point that Wonder Woman tells Batman that the parademons are a harbinger of sort for Steppenwolf.
I like to dream, girl. Do the magic carpet ride.
Who is this kind of just nondescript mythological creature who we find out apparently tried to take over the Earth millennia ago. And the humans and the Amazonians and the Atlanteans all combined to defeat him and his mother boxes.
That's in the past. Mother box is what I call George off air.
Aw, which is a fucking term this film uses.
Why don't they just call it MacGuffin? Why don't they just commit and call it the MacGuffin?
I just can't believe. Like, mother box sounds so ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
So basically then the film becomes about them trying to kind of keep these mother boxes away from Steppenwolf, who's trying to collect them. At some point they get one of these boxes and they think like, oh shit. Oh, well, they fight Steppenwolf and they fail miserably in trying to defeat him. It's at this point, which actually is kind of like a really cool, I think, action sequence. But anyway.
Yeah, it's one of the better. That, and I actually think the sequence in Amazonia, is it Amazonia?
Yes.
That's a pretty good sequence too. Armond White's a big fan.
That is a really good sequence. Mm-hmm. Yes, totally. So basically they get one of these boxes and then they realize, or they think like, oh, hey, shit, maybe we can use this box to resurrect Superman, which is kind of a real, like, again, the plot just basically needs them to come to that logical conclusion. And that's what they do. They resurrect Superman. He's reborn, but he doesn't really recognize them. So they fight. And at that point, Lois Lane shows up and reminds him of who he is. And then he basically kind of joins, obviously, the Justice League in confronting Steppenwolf one final time in Russia.
Northern Russia. You know that place, Northern Russia?
That nondescript place, Northern Russia. And they fight him in Northern Russia, and they beat the shit out of him. And once Superman shows up on the scene, it's kind of not even a fight.
Yeah, he kind of just shows up and kicks some ass.
And there are, by the way, there are also some brief references, or like one or two references to Darkseid, who clearly this film was kind of like the Thanos of the Marvel
Well, they
universe.
kind of set him up in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, so you sort of expect to see him in this one, and then you just don't. So this movie stars Ben Affleck as. Sorry, this film stars Ben Affleck as Bruce Wayne / Batman, Henry Cavill as Kal-El / Clark Porn Stash Kent / Superman, Amy Adams as Lois Lane, Gal Gadot in also a very, very, her weakest performance so far as Wonder Woman.
Agreed.
As Diana Prince / Wonder Woman, Ezra Miller, the best thing about the movie, as Barry Allen / The Flash, Momoa as Arthur Curry / Aquaman. We don't refer to Jason Momoa by his Christian name. Ray Fisher doing just shit on all over in this movie as Victor Stone / Cyborg. Jeremy Irons as sexy Alfred Pennyworth. Diane Lane as one scene Martha Kent. The great Connie Nielsen as Queen Hippolyta. And J.K. Simmons as James Gordon. You know, I didn't get to say this in our last episode, but I feel like part of the thing that the executives at DC must have said, they must have been like, Zach, we want to make Christopher Nolan's Batman, that kind of thing, but make it sexy. So like give everyone really great Warby Parker glasses and make sure everybody's ripped and make sure all their clothes have like a kind of like, they're kind of like, you know, a little like from the Frank and Oak catalog, and they all look very cool. Like this is the sexiest Alfred Pennyworth is ever going to be, and it's definitely the sexiest that J.K. Simmons. And J.K. Simmons is barely in the movie. It's such a waste. But boy, oof.
Good for him for cashing in that check, though.
Yeah, this took like 10 years to make. They went through many different versions. There was a period where they were shooting a version of this in Australia with George Miller directing it. And what's his name? Who's the actor from Call Me By Your Name in The Social Network? Armie Hammer was playing Superman. I'm sorry, Batman. He was playing Batman, which I think would be a great take on it. Yeah. They even shot some of the movie and then they couldn't finish it. And it was actually very controversial, I think, in Australia because it would have brought huge production to Australia.
Damn. Now I just want to see like a Call Me By Your Name, like with Batman and Robin.
Call Me By Your Bat.
Call me, well, you know, where they're just like, you know, fucking each other, and the one's calling the one Batman, the other one's calling the one Robin. I think it would work.
It'd be great. Schneider's cut was deemed unwatchable, so Whedon took over. And then there was sort of a tragic situation in Zack Snyder's family, so he couldn't finish the movie.
So my understanding is that basically that it was unwatchable because there was most of the post-production, like special effects stuff wasn't done, right? Somebody described it as like a car without the doors or without like,
and it was 4 hours long, but I don't know how true, we don't know how true any of this is. Like, that's the thing. Like, the Hollywood Reporter piece is really interesting, but there's a lot to unpack. I think that's okay. So spoiler alert, I don't think this movie's very good. I get very excited at the idea of seeing some of these characters on screen. Like, I'm like, holy shit, like Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman, like characters I really think are cool. And that almost is enough as a selling point. Like, that's enough for me to want to watch this movie. But, you know, we're in this age of like IP exhaustion where we're just like, how do we get all these characters together? And my biggest complaint about this movie is that despite having like such great characters, because to me, like before like in 2007, 2008, before Iron Man came out, I didn't really give a fuck about Marvel outside of like, I kind of liked Captain America and I've always loved Spider-Man, but like I didn't care about the Avengers. But like I've always thought that DC was much, 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 much cooler and more interesting than Marvel. Like I think that so to see them all on the big screen is really exciting to me, but this movie just doesn't. It has this weird blend of like Schneider's like faux nihilism, which we talked about in our episode with Michael Carroll, meets this like world building, very clear 3-act Josh Whedon-esque humor to it that like never. It feels like he just
or the human.
He was like, okay, I have like, 3 months. Let me just remake Avengers, but with none of the warmth. So it feels like an exercise as opposed to a movie.
It's funny you should say that thing too, and maybe we could talk about this a little bit later in terms of the release of the cut or the news that the cut has been released. But
sorry, I just every time you say it, I come a little bit because I'm just so excited.
just a little drip, bit. not an entire bus, but just a little
Schneider
drip.
cut.
Schneider cut. What if I if like we We do like some sort of tantric thing and like Snyder.
So good.
But
hang on, I just got to polish my machine guns.
The idea of brand loyalty, which you kind of mentioned, is something that I was thinking a lot about when I was watching this and thinking about why is it that people were really kind of obsessed with these films and are like just willing to just like go to bat for them. Like it doesn't make any sort of fucking sense. And then I figured out, I was like, oh, it's all about like brand loyalty and the way in which
Star Wars mug. I'm literally holding a Star Wars mug.
As as Americans don't really have
community.
I don't know. Yeah, we don't have any community, so we're just kind of like loyal to our brands. But yes, this film is exhausting. It also reminded me of something that we didn't talk about the last time.
How hot everybody in Dawn of Justice is?
What was that?
How hot everyone in Dawn of Justice is?
Oh, everybody here is beautiful, yeah.
Oh my God.
No, but also just thinking, so last time we didn't get, I think, because I was listening to the episode, we didn't really delve into it. But, and hear me out, because I usually say this as a joke, but I mean it. But the ways in which also, I mean, not entirely, but the ways in which this film and the previous film are in some sort of way dealing with certain kind of like American traumas and perhaps like the American trauma of like 9/11. Mm-hmm. And that there's this kind of sense of like this constant like replaying of that trauma and of like that horrible event, but that there's no sense of like a resolution or there's no sense of really confronting it because there's no attempt to really confront the like historical political dynamics of that kind of event. So even like so even just think about like this like another really terrible thing about this film is that the villain is so fucking bland
and generic. Yeah.
So generic, and I'm like, that is like one of those instances where you're like, this is where you could point to this film and a lot of films like it and say like there's no sense of any sort of kind of imaginative power or will here. They're just like, oh, let's create this like bring this like mythological thing called Steppenwolf.
Well, you know, one thing that I was thinking about a little bit I have a bunch of things I want to talk about, including I actually think that like watching all these films in order made me think a lot about, like, we joke about you calling things reactionary, but I think that this movie is so reactionary, like unbelievably reactionary, at least from my point of view. But one thing that I think about in relationship to that is I think that I remember, speaking of brands, seeing The Last Jedi for the first time, and there's that moment early on in The Last Jedi that has such cognitive dissonance the first time you see it, where Brendan Gleeson, who's so good as not Brendan Gleeson. Domhnall Gleeson, his son, is so good as General Hux, has the bit where he's like, tell that crew, like, we're going to fire on. And, like, he has, like, the big sort of, like, Empire speech. Mm-hmm. And then Oscar Isaac's like, I'm still holding for General Hux. And, like, it takes the wind out of the sequence because we so often need to buy into these villains as legitimate in order for them to be scary. And so the fact that Rian Johnson, like, you know, we're not here to talk about how amazing The Last Jedi is, but the fact that he's willing to play with it in that way, I think is probably so offensive to people that like need to take the legacy of these movies seriously, because he's like, it's just a white dude wearing black clothes who's like, and like, I wish that he did that a little bit with Loki. Like, I think he found a human characteristic in the Loki character in Avengers, and there's just no room for that in this movie. And it's so disappointing that like, we can't have a villain who's kind of a real person in these movies, because if we would have to consider a little bit like what they might mean. And I think that speaks to the kind of, we're force fed in our culture this like the big baddie, but we're never asked to reckon with what they actually could mean. And I think that, you know, you can accuse, as you've pointed out, Nolan of doing that very, very much so in The Dark Knight, and then over leaning on origin story in The Dark Knight Rises. Like, I think that that's true in those movies too. Yeah,
and not to sound also just like somebody who's almost in their 40s, but also like there is something to be said about like an actual human actor on the screen.
Yes.
That one can, let's say, relate to, or at the very least have some sort of affective relationship to, and to just watch this ridiculous like long extended cutscene from like a Nintendo 64 game battle with these heroes who, and some of them are just like not, I'm sorry, like Gal Gadot is not like the greatest actress, and to have her like
she's not very
some
good
of
in
her
this
lines And like this, it's so fucking
to push
dry.
back on that a little
It's so
bit,
dry.
I think that there's a weird line with Wonder Woman. One thing this movie doesn't do anything with, but one thing that I love about the Avengers film is that it sets up the fact that these people are have to find a way to work together, and this movie they do a good job in that. This movie kind of gestures at that, and one thing that I like is the kind of tension between like technologically minded Bruce Wayne being like, we have to use whatever technology we can to defeat this guy, and Wonder Woman's kind of like more salt of the earth, kind of like, no, technology is just another tool. Like, I think that's really interesting, but the problem is that writing it, that they don't, kind of similarly to what's his face, Steppenwolf, they don't really allow her any real humanity in this movie. She's like she's like an ideal. She's like the idea of a pure person. So, and Gal Gadot can personify that really well, but she has to give these longish 4 to 5 line speeches about this kind of stuff that no human would ever be able to say. So I don't know, like, I think that what's one of the good things about the Wonder Woman film is that it makes an attempt at least to humanize her, and like they're just not interested in that in this at all, and it's disappointing.
It's funny you should say that though, because I also thought at some point it's like, oh, her character is one of the only characters that has a real motivation in this film, because this guy or this creature slaughtered a whole bunch of Amazonians,
right,
to get that mother box. So she's one of the only, and I'm not saying it works well, it doesn't, but she's one of the only ones that has some sort of kind of motivation to really kill this thing.
Can I please?
Can I just briefly ask why you thought? I'm just curious. I'm not saying you're wrong, but you're wrong. No, but why do you think this film might be more reactionary than the previous one? Because I'd never thought about it.
Well, there's that line in the last one where Batman's like, "How many good people are left in this world?" And it's not in response to anything, but these movies create this monolithic idea of the world is always getting worse. And there's a line in the middle of this movie where Alfred, who works for a billionaire, who is not at all played as a servile character in this movie. He's played as like Batman's like main man. Mm-hmm. Bruce Wayne and Alfred are on his like private jet, like drinking in this like IKEA designed nightmare, or this like it looks like a cave, but it's a place. And they're
doing tons of coke.
They're like, well, I think they're drinking, and they're talking about, there's this line in it where Alfred says to Batman, I don't recognize this world. I'm sorry, Alfred says to Bruce Wayne, I don't recognize this world. And Bruce Wayne says, me neither, but we have to save it. And the problem is that we're meant to understand that is because Superman has died, our beacon of hope is gone, and there's nothing else left. And that's so reactionary to me, because it's pointing this image at like, well, this like deity, this like hero figure, this prophetic character is gone. The world is in terrible shape. But we're hearing this from like 2 wealthy white dudes on a private jet. And the problem with that is that it's fine that exists in the world. The problem is that that's going to be read by like people that love this movie. Not all of them. There are plenty of people that just love superhero movies, but it's so reactionary because it speaks to a mindset that's like not interested in cause and effect, but wants their feelings about the world validated. And I think that at the very least, the reason the Dark Knight movies feel less reactionary to me is that those kind of statements are rooted in a concrete thing that happens in the movie. In other words, like at the beginning of the third film, we have this really interesting, at least I think it's interesting idea of like, they've created this Dent Act, and the Dent Act is, has put a lot more people in jail, and we're supposed to believe that things are better, but it's based entirely on a lie, as all of these things are. So there's actual tension in the things that people say in that movie, which I think gives it there's still definitely like, we're still listening to law enforcement talk about how the world is quote unquote better because more people are in jail, probably mostly people of color and like poor people in reality. At least there's like the possibility in that film to acknowledge that what the characters say is incorrect. Like if you have a little bit of imagination, you don't have to look at these like so-called these cops and these heroes as right all the time. This movie's entire preface is like the millionaire's right. He sees the world as always getting worse, and we're all supposed to kind of accept that because he's our quote unquote hero. There's no attempt in this movie at all to get a reaction to get an opinion or an idea of the world from anybody that isn't like a beautiful white person.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that too, because there's that one scene where the Flash and Cyborg have that moment where he tries to give him a fist bump.
Yeah,
and he says like, oh wait, like too racially charged.
Yeah.
And it's like one of the only moments in which there's a real kind of acknowledgement, not only obviously that that Cyborg isn't white, but that there's like a kind of society out there in which things like racism exist. Although I do have to say, though, there is also that earlier moment during that montage at the very beginning.
Montage.
Ooh, fancy film word. Whereby you see that white kind of neo-Nazi looking dude attacking the Muslim grocer.
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I was like, and it was at those moments where I was like, oh, I'm sure Snyder's probably like a well-meaning like Hollywood liberal for the most part, but again, like he's probably on the right side of like most social issues, but again, that there's a certain kind of just a kind of adherence or a really cheap kind of worshiping of certain kind of older traditional power structures
and mentalities
and values. Yeah, I do have to say though that like I do think one thing that Armond White gets right, not in the sense that it makes these films good, because these films are not good.
Just for context, Armond White called this film a masterpiece. And I think he's a pretty interesting writer. I don't agree with him, but I think he writes interesting things, and I think.
Can I ask? I'm sorry. I know we've discussed this. I think we've discussed this before, but just again, do you think he's being sincere?
I think that's part of the power of it. I really don't know. From what I.
Or do you think at this point, I think it's a gag. I think at this point, I think it's like a gimmick.
Yeah, well, I think at a certain point you reach. He's not a dumb guy. He's smart, and he knows how to, get attention and stay sort of a voice in the culture. He, it might be trolling, but I also think he is a writer that really confronts the politics of what he perceives to be the politics of things, and I think that's interesting. Totally. And there's not a lot of film critics that do that in a direct way. Another example is someone like A.S. Hamra, who writes really great. He frames so much of his writing around contemporary issues that it's really, really interesting.
Sorry, wait, hold on. I just want to say the Armond White thing. Just that I do think one thing that he gets right, at least about Snyder's kind of take on these characters, is that he does view them in very kind of mythological, archetypal ways. So that this is something that we talked about a lot in the previous episode, that I do think one thing that is successful, let's say, about his take on Superman is that if such a character did exist, we would be constantly kind of in awe of the kind of power that this creature has. And I think that is one thing that he does, at least with that character, where he kind of imbues him with a certain kind of just like awe-inspiring feeling, right? That there's like this person, this creature is so fucking powerful. He looks human, but yeah, he could like fucking destroy the world. But I'm not saying it adds up to anything. I'm just saying that there is like a take on the character that is.
Well, I think the sort of the best thing about these movies is the idea of like there are gods among men, and how do we deal with those? And I think there's a lot of room for that to have something to say about our contemporary. Could superheroes function as commentary on billionaires? I don't know. Like there's a lot of room for for it to do something that ultimately this movie in particular, I give AV Club's review of this film is a little bit like, if I were to sum it up, and there's something interesting that comes up in that regarding the politics, but the first thing they say is like, man, we'll take Schneider's like, sort of like fascism 101 over this like lack of clarity in terms of a point of view. Like this movie is nothing.
Yeah,
it's like a assembled piece of like taking the bits from, we talked about it, it's like Whedon humor meets Schneider nihilism, and like at least Schneider had a point of view. I don't know if I agree with that 100%, but it just feels really like someone made soup but they put too much water in the broth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm oddly getting hungry for like soupy soup.
I love soup. Did you want to say anything else about that before we moved on?
I'm sure. No, I think we got it all. I think we covered it all. No. There's still more to go.
I want to really quickly talk about one other thing from AV Club, this is from the review, which is like a C- review. I think C- or something. From the AV Club. There's even an interesting, pointed observation about the relationship between Batman and Superman, namely in the notion that the godlike son of Krypton actually had more first-hand experiences of ordinary human life than the Dark Knight, who spent his entire life being filthy rich. There is a scene where Ben Affleck, Bruce Wayne is like, I can't lead them. Like, I need a guy who has lived, fallen in love, had a real life. And it's actually a totally underexploited thing, because one of the interesting things about Batman is that his life was, in a sense, ruined for him as a child, and how much of that is his own responsibility for not dealing with his trauma or using his trauma to beat the shit out of poor people instead of moving on and like maybe doing something productive in the world. Like the idea of Superman living a decent life and Batman living what I would describe as like kind of a really problematic life. Like there's something to that the movie never does anything with, or that it almost never happens in the way that we often can confront and deal with Batman and Superman.
Yeah, and I mean that's like the limitation of like these corporate products,
right?
That they really have to regurgitate the same kind of narratives, the same kind of takes. Otherwise, the fear of like losing $300 million, which this film fucking cost $300 million.
It's going to cost more, and it's going to cost 20 to 30 more.
Good God. And to think about just kind of, the need again to just regurgitate something safe, but obviously by doing such you create like an absolute shit film.
There's one scene in this movie, or there's not even a scene in this movie that really, really works. There's a couple moments that work for me. But one thing that works really well is that there's a very brief scene, probably 25, 30 minutes in the movie, between Martha Kent and Lois Lane, where for some reason Martha Kent has left Smallville and is in Metropolis, and she just has like a conversation with Lois Lane. And I forget what the line is, but Amy Adams gives like a little look to her, and it makes you go like, God, these movies don't deserve Amy Adams. Like, she's so good in everything she does, and she's on screen in this movie for like 7-8 minutes at most. And the reason I bring it up is because, man, when you think about like sort of the masculine images of this movie, like Batman as billionaire and how we confront that kind of stuff, one of the things that stuck out to me about this movie is how traditional, in a negative way, the women are treated in this movie.
Yeah, this also, and we didn't talk about this in the last episode too, but in the last episode, she has to be saved like 3 different times.
Yeah,
I think, and she basically plays the role of like the woman who's there to remind the dude of why he should be doing the thing he needs to do.
There's a moment in this movie after he comes back to life where they fly to Smallville, to the family farm, which has been, seized probably by a bank, and she says that she apologized to him for not. Like, at least to me, it was unclear. Is she apologizing because she like took a few months off from being like a hard-hitting journalist after her husband died? For a second, I wondered if maybe she cheated on him.
Oh yes, it's funny. I think this. It seemed like it could be read either way.
And how?
Well,
exactly.
It's not cheating. He's dead.
And how many? But that's the thing. Like, there's something.
Unless she fucked like Brainiac or something.
Oh, I hope she just fucked that Peter Sarsgaard head. I just like.
She's like, listen, I got to tell you something. She's like, I fucked the guy. He's like, oh, I get it. You thought I was dead. It was Brainiac. This is unacceptable.
Listen, what happened is I was making out with Brainiac, and he said release the Snyder cut, and I came a little, and there's nothing I can do.
From the Adventures of Superman 487, Lois Lane fucks Brainiac.
A guy comes back to life. Sorry, it took me a minute to get there. A guy comes back to life. They fly to a field, and the first thing that happens is like his successful girlfriend. He's a fucking alien.
He's like, hey, you bitch, did you cheat on me while I was dead?
Literally, the first thing is like it's like this idea that like she has to immediately apologize to this guy for existing.
Yes, yeah, yes. It's. I'm glad you mentioned that because it is. I forgot about it. And I was like, that's ridiculous.
It's totally ridiculous. And one thing we talk a lot about masculine roles in this film. What we don't talk about is like feminine roles through a male gaze. And this movie has like, because every filmmaker we've everyone that's directed a Batman film has been a white dude. And they have varying degrees of success in how they portray women. I mean, even the so-called strength of Catwoman in Batman Returns is like, as you pointed out, is perverted a little bit by this like girly kind of thing that she does throughout the movie. And this film just like, it doubles down on that. Like the idea that the female character spends most of the film feeling guilty that for nothing is just so like really, really retrograde to me.
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
And I don't really understand what if anything they're doing with Wonder Woman beyond.
Yes.
There's also a whole bunch of. I mean, and listen, Gal Gadot's beautiful, also, but a lot of it is like gawking at her. A lot of the photography of her.
But she also spends a lot of time being like, "Oh yeah, this reminds me of this guy I used to love. Oh yeah, that also reminds me of this guy I used to love."
Yeah, totally. Like, yeah, that's a good point.
It's like that guy fucking died like 80 years ago.
Right, which is something they talk about in the movie a little bit.
Like she would be over it.
And you wonder how much of this is an issue of what already existed in the material and how much of it is Whedon being like, shit, I got 3 months until this movie has to come out. Like, which you can see in every aspect of the production. Like, it's not a very good looking movie at all. There's some nice looking bits in it, but like, I honestly think that Zack Snyder is a better maker of action and visual sequences than Whedon is. And you can, I don't know what is what in it, but just something to think about.
Although also the way in which...
God damn it, George. That's right. Apologize. I've been dead for a year.
People shared some screenshots of like Batman v Superman. I think when the news was revealed that the new cut was dropping in a year, and there were like literally screenshots from that film that some of them looked cool, but there were also certain screenshots it just looked like brown sludge like smeared across the screen, right. And I'm like, what the fuck are we looking at? And how do people think that this shot, let's say, that is composed in such a way where it just looks like 7 or 8 different kinds of browns layered on top of one another? Like, it's not a fucking Rothko. It is not supposed to be an impressionist painting. It just looks like shit. And people are like, that shot is beautiful. I'm like, you are out of your fucking mind. Like, just out of your mind. But he does have an interesting visual. Sorry, he does have an interesting visual at times, kind of vitality to him. I'm not saying that, but
I mean, again, it's like you said in the last episode. He may not have vision, but he has style, and I think that's true.
Right.
And, but again, it's like a lot of it feels very retrograde. This is a small thing, at least to me, but the men are so manly in this movie, with the exception of...
they're manly.
A manly man, except for Flash. And it feels like there's that bit where he's like, I'm scared of everything. And Batman's like, save one person. And Flash is like, what? And he's like, save one and you'll know. And it feels like, again, these are superhero movies. I get it. But the idea that like in order for a beta male to be a man, he has to save someone, like he has to be a hero, is so like, this movie doesn't even play or acknowledge, maybe it does with Batman a little bit. It doesn't play at all, as you said, with the idea that like maybe the idea of being a hero is complicated. That's not even something this movie has on its mind, despite it having the most problematic hero in like all of mainstream superhero-dom. It's like, no, if you save someone, you're good. And like, it's so driven by this idea of like being a man means being brave and fighting, as opposed to being like, no, I'm scared and I want to run away. Like, it just doesn't, I don't know. It bothers me that that Flash's kind of like weirdness has to be like shaped into a sort of like maleness.
It's funny though, because I actually thought that, I sort of agree with you, but I also thought like, oh, it is kind of captivating, or at least different, that you do have a hero who's basically like his job is just to save people and not to fight the bad guy.
I like that a lot, and it's a good choice. I like that they have different responsibilities. The Avengers films did that really well.
And I do think, even though, I mean, my God, that again, do we? It's 2017. Do we need another fucking joke about brunch Like, we get it. People go to brunch.
Oh no, I'll take any talk about bougie brunch. I love it. Like I'm sitting there just like, yeah, this guy's a proletariat hero taking down the
Lube's like, oh yeah, fuck brunch.
The bourgeois capitalist machine of brunch.
Glad I got out of Brooklyn where everybody's just having brunch 24/7.
Brunch.
But he is Ezra Miller.
Brunch.
Ezra Miller is the best part of this film.
Also kind of a problematic guy. So it's like there's a lot.
I've heard. Yeah.
I have to say this. I think this is the most forgettable superhero movie we've seen so far.
You know what? I literally spent, and I did this kind of on my own, trying not to start the film again, but I literally spent today 15 minutes thinking. I was like, what's the cold open to this film? And it took me, and it could be that quarantine has completely and utterly annihilated my memory and my attention span, but I had just seen this film yesterday and I had just started it again, and 2 hours later it was like, what's the opening sequence again?
It's Superman on the iPhone, right?
Oh, you're right. It is, yes. But also the Batman thing.
But
yes, even before the Batman thing, there's a Superman thing.
What's the point of that opening? Because it never, like, I like them. I like the idea of them being like, what's the best thing about Earth? And then it cuts away. Like, that's interesting. And then they do nothing with it. It barely ever comes back. And again, it's this like, do you remember when he flies in and he like punches Steppenwolf and he's like, my idea is justice. And you're like, what does that even mean? Like, what is justice? I don't know. Yeah, I mean,
it would be awesome though if they sat down and they read Plato's Republic before getting together and like, this is a Justice League, but what is justice?
I just feel like this is a
Polemarchus says that justice is paying back your debt. Sorry.
Jesus Christ. That would be cool.
Yeah.
I'm profoundly upset that, again, I don't like Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, but at least it isn't this like unmolded piece of Play-Doh that doesn't do anything at all like this movie does. I just don't. So that being said, the Snyder Cut, which I don't really think ultimately existed, is now they're going to spend $20 to $30 million. It could be as long as 4 hours in length. Wow. I don't know what really is going to be there, but I'm going to say it. I'm actually sort of interested in it. I'm curious to see what that is.
Well, as a cultural product, it's certainly interesting. But I do also really lament the fact that some of the worst people in the world are getting exactly what they want. And I didn't read the article, but there was an article today stating this very same thing.
Yeah.
Just about like, this isn't necessarily setting a good precedent.
Well, I think that when I was listening to The Big Picture, which is a really good episode, or part of their episode this week is on this, and they talk about a couple things. They talk about how like there are people that just legitimately want the movie. Then there are the kind of like internet troll terrorists who can't have an exchange that hide behind like Batman images that will not have a real conversation with you about what the movie is. But there's also this idea of films not being films anymore and becoming like quote unquote content.
Yes.
Like in the example they give, and they don't say this negatively because this is not a negative example, but a year ago when Quentin Tarantino re-edited The Hateful Eight and it became like a 4-episode series on, like, at least that was like a real recontextualization of what that is. But the precedent that's being set of being like, that's not the right version of the movie, here's the right version of the movie, when really on some level this is just another way to get people to sign up for a content streamer, is a little disappointing. And I don't really blame Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder was going to finish this movie. Something horrible happened in his life and he wants to complete the movie. Like, that's totally fine. It's what it, as you said, might mean for the culture.
Well, also, I mean, it's crazy to think now we've reached the point where it's not just even enough about, let's say, rebooting or making different films with the same characters, but now we're just kind of like rebooting the same films.
Right. And there's room to talk about the idea that maybe the constant feeling of victimization that people have created for themselves around a superhero movie is sort of astonishing. So yeah, I don't see myself revisiting this version of the movie, but I will watch the Snyder version, and I'm gonna push that we talk about it when it comes out at some point, if you will. If you will indulge me.
Well, if we're still around as a civilization.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, shit.
2021.
It'll be more like the dream sequence from Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're in a bunker.
So we
God, now I'm actually hoping for civilizational collapse because we won't have to get that 4-hour film.
What a rave review. I feel like that's it. That's all I have to say about Justice League. You?
Yeah, I think that's about it. There was something else that I wanted to say though, in relationship to the re-release of the cut, but now I'm just kind of blanking.
The re-release of what?
Of the film. Sorry, of the new cut
What
coming
film?
out.
What cut?
This film, Justice League.
But what?
There was something else.
What's the name of the cut?
The Snyder cut. No. Damn it.
Well, we can maybe we can get
Foiled.
there later on.
Perhaps.
Next up, in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
You know what I'm excited about, George? I feel as though our emotional. I mean, we were in the middle of a weird time in human existence, but I feel like our energy and enthusiasm for the films has reflected the cultural experience of these movies. Where in 1989, everyone was like, "A Batman movie, this kicks ass," and that lasted maybe through the Dark Knight, and then we started to get a little bit of fatigue around the Dark Knight Rises, and then we've just spent the past 6 weeks being like, I don't want to. So I'm excited because I feel like the next two things we're going to talk about are movies, actual movies.
Yes. Yeah.
One is Lego Batman, and we're going to have Matthew Kroll from the only podcast about movies come talk to us about that. And then what are we closing the season with?
Oh, we're going to talk about lightning rods, the Joker film from just last year.
Right.
With our friend from the Other Men Need Help podcast, Mark Pagan.
Who texted me the day the film came out and said, "Did you see Joker?" And I said, "No, it came out today." And he was like, "Oh, we got to talk about it." So I'm excited to talk to him about that.
I'm excited to hear what Mark has to say.
And then, also, if you haven't gotten enough of us, this week we were, or a couple weeks ago now when this gets released, we were on All the President's Minutes, the podcast hosted by the hardest working man in movie podcasting, Blake Howard, who released 45 episodes of his podcast while we were recording. All the President's Minutes is a 1 minute by minute dissection of the film The President's Men by Alan J. Pakula. George, that was fun, right?
It was, yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I think I listened to a little bit of it yesterday. I felt like the whole time I was like, you were like saying really interesting things about like political history and propaganda and recent history and how films talk about that in the background. I was like, did you guys see Zodiac? Zodiac's good.
Zodiac is good, and it's definitely the best Fincher film so far, bar none.
Did you watch your Blu-ray yet?
I did, yeah. I watched it like a week and a half ago.
So
yeah.
good, right?
2 weeks ago. Oh yeah, it still fucking holds up. It's so good.
The other night, Emily, my wife, and I were I forget where we were. We were in our house. Where else would we fucking be right now? And she was like, "There's not a lot of basements."
Weren't you at Spago? I think
we were at Spago. She actually said out loud, not related at all to the film, like, "I feel like there's not a lot of basements in Southern California." And I stared at her with with goosebumps for like 10 minutes until finally she was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Zodiac." And on All the President's Men, we announced the next season of the show, which we have not announced on the podcast yet.
Whoa!
What is season 4 of Oeuvre Busters going to talk about?
We are going to look at, I'm really fucking excited because we're back into the realm of art house cinema with the films of Kurosawa and Mifune.
Akira Kurosawa and Toshiro Mifune.
We're going to look at their 16 films, their collaborative work.
Yeah, and we're going to have some really great guests for that. I think we'll do a mix of, of course, we're going to do a mix of some solo episodes, meaning George and I guess some dual episodes, and then we're gonna have some great guests. And it's interesting, we'll do probably an intro episode on this, but it's interesting to think of those as art house films because they certainly have that label, but I also feel like in some ways Kurosawa and Mifune invented like every contemporary genre of filmmaking that's genre specific, and I think that'll be interesting to talk about. I'm so excited. I love those two guys, and there's a few films I haven't seen that I'm excited about. I
have to say there's a lot of films I haven't seen, so I'm excited to fucking dive into those.
Yeah, totally. It's going to be great. And then we'll have some more announcements in the future. And links to everything we talked about will be in the show notes. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. We have to. Oh, should I read our new reviews? Are there new reviews?
Are there new reviews?
There are 2 new reviews on.
Do it.
On,
yes.
What do you call it? On iTunes.
These must be about my sultry, velvety voice. I cannot wait to
George's
hear
voice. This review says, George, can you say Schneider cut?
I will not do it because...
Say Schneider cut. Say it.
Schneider cut.
All right. This first one is from May 7th from Claude Fergus, who gave us 5 stars and said, for film podcasts, look no further. Oeuvre Busters is one of my favorite film podcasts because it's a perfect balance of thoughtful discussion without devolving into unbearable self-importance. Well, agree to disagree. Both boasts are intelligent while maintaining a healthy dose of humor and self-deprecation. They pack.
I don't know if both.
Yeah, but both seems like a stretch. Unhealthy. He also says healthy. I don't know how healthy we are. They pack more into an episode that's under an hour than most of the bloated 1 to 3 hour film podcasts out there. Yeah, that's right. We're looking at you, podcast. I'm not going to name.
Let's hurry up, by the way, because we're at 52 minutes right now, so we gotta get under the hour.
What do you? Okay, we have 9 minutes.
Although, otherwise Claude's review will be in vain.
I subscribe to a lot of film podcasts. Oeuvre Busters is one of the only ones that I listen to in full every week. That's very, very thank you, Claude Fergus.
Yeah, that's really nice, actually.
And then the other review is from May 14th, 2020. It's from Lauren Style, who I happen to know is a New York City playwright, and I've directed one of his plays. So that's how I know him. But we haven't talked in a long time, so I really appreciate him giving us 5 stars and saying, really thought out commentary, very entertaining. And he
awesome.
has
Thank
a
you, Lauren.
podcast. Mark?
Lauren?
Oh, I heard Lawrence.
Lauren.
I heard Mark. I don't know. He has a podcast called...
You're still thinking about our friend Mark Pagan.
Mark Pagan. I
don't blame you. He's a great guy.
He's the best. He has a podcast called What We're Into, which is available online. And they talk a lot about superhero Marvel stuff, so that's cool. All right, well, I don't want to... I'm worried we're going to go another 8 minutes, so I guess we better wrap up the episode.
Gotta hurry up.
Anything else?
No. That's about it.
If you have questions, comments, things you'd like us to discuss, please email us, oeuvrebusters@gmail.com, or get in touch on Twitter, oeuvrebusters, and we will, if we can, we will devote an episode to your good questions, like we did recently with the termite episode. The termite episode. I'm Liam Billingham.
I was Gerasimos Fragopoulos.
And Jerry, we miss you. This was...
Oeuvre
Busters. Wait, say
Snyder cut.
I love you so much.
Oh God, I'm gonna fuck the Snyder cut.